Open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 4. Genesis is the very first book in the Bible. Genesis chapter 4. This has nothing to do with anything I'm going to say, but man, sometimes we're in the middle of doing that, something will pop in my head, and it almost gets me off track. That's happened a time or two, and I'm like, where was I? And so anyway, Genesis chapter 4, we've talked about how vital worship is. Matter of fact, the name of this series is vital because worship is such a huge part of our relationship with God. And I wanted to make sure that we grab hold of this. And when we talk about worship, we're not talking about the 20 minutes worth of singing that we do in here on Sunday only. Matter of fact, real worship impacts every aspect of our life. It impacts how we treat each other. It impacts the way I respond to disappointment. It impacts the way that I think about the things that I do. I mean, it impacts everything we do. Romans 12 says to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. So it's connected to everything that you and I do in our world, and it's vital. And so in our walk with God, you know, Jesus told the lady at the well in John chapter 4, he said, it's not about a place, it's about a person. And so that we're called to worship the Father. We're called to worship Jesus. We're called to give our lives and those type of things. Well, today I want to talk to you about acceptable worship. You're in Genesis 4. Stay there. You don't have to turn to Philippians 4, but Philippians 4 says this. Paul said, he said, at the moment I have all I need and more. I'm generously supplied with the gifts you sent for me with Epaphroditus. They are a sweet-smelling sacrifice. Sweet-smelling sacrifice. You know, I don't know about you. You probably all have childhood memories. And in my home, growing up in my home, man, on Saturday morning, I could wake up to the smell of bacon or sausage cooking in my mom's skillet. And it just like filled the house. I mean, it was taking place in the kitchen, but it filled the house. Some of your mouths are watering right now. I lost you at bacon. And so, or I had you at bacon. So here's the thing, is that just that smell would fill the house. And it says this, that he said that their gift had just filled heaven. And it said this about it. It says that it's acceptable. Everybody say acceptable. Acceptable and pleasing to God. So there was something about that gift that God was like, that's acceptable to me. So we're talking about what makes worship acceptable. Which means that sometimes that we could call it worship and it's not acceptable. You know, the truth of the matter is, man, we can sing a song and just be impacted emotionally by what takes place. And there's not anything wrong with that. That doesn't necessarily mean it's worship, though. So we're going to look at some qualities of worship. So Genesis chapter 4, verse 1 says this. Now Adam had sexual relations with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant. When she gave birth to Cain, she said, with the Lord's help, I have produced a man. So the first kid they had was Cain. Later she gave birth to his brother and named him Abel. The second kid they had was Abel. When they grew up, Abel became a shepherd while Cain cultivated the ground. When it was time for the harvest, Cain presented some. Everybody say some. Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift. The best portions of the firstborn lambs from the flock, the Lord accepted. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but he did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but he didn't accept Cain and his gift. He accepted Abel's, and he didn't accept Cain. Isn't that wild to think that both of them were giving something, and God actually is like, yes, man, I'm honored with that. I accept that. And with Cain's, he's like, no. You know, I think the problem is when it comes to things in our lives, again, because we have such a religious mindset that we think just going through the duty is fulfilling our responsibility. And when we talk about the fact that Jesus didn't come so that humanity would have one more religion, he came so that we would have a relationship and we would have access to the Father. That then when you think about every other relationship and how we interact there, that there's things that we do that communicate value when we're not just, I know with my wife, if I just go through the motions, man, she gets it. She picks up on it like that, calls me out on it, makes me mad. And if she feels that way, I mean, how much about our Heavenly Father that not just going through the motions, but recognizing and like doing it out of a grateful heart. And so it said this, that Cain, when he just gave some. Almost like it was an afterthought. It was like, it's time to give, okay, we'll just grab something. But it says about Abel that he gave the best. Everybody say the best. So he gave the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. So when it was time for him to do this, he was very intentional, very deliberate. He looked and it was like, that one. And back then, if they'd had more people, then probably somebody around them would be like, dude, that's your best. So I think so too. Why do you think there's one better? If there is, let's give that one instead. No, that's your best one. Okay, that's the one I want to give. Yeah, but it's your first also. Shouldn't you wait? Shouldn't you wait to see if there's others that come just like it? We're doing it now, so this is our best and our first right now. So here's the thing about acceptable worship. Number one is this, is that acceptable worship is intentionally reckless. Intentionally reckless. Now, when I say intentionally reckless, the word reckless means that it's only reckless to those on the outside looking in. That for Abel, it wasn't reckless. For Abel, it was an expression of his relationship with God, of how he saw God, and it was an act of faith. It was, I can give my best first because I trust God to take care of me on the other side of this. Matter of fact, Hebrews chapter 11 says that Abel did this by faith. He offered a better sacrifice. By faith, he did it. And so God was pleased with it. His offering was accepted. His act of worship was accepted. Now, as I've talked about before, that certainly giving is a part of worship, but if we limit it to that, we're just thinking too narrowly. Just like if we limit worship to singing, it's too narrowly. It's a part of all of our life. And so in our world and the things that we do and how we respond to situations, to be able to say, Lord, you're worthy of my best. And again, last week I tied this into, to our daily week. And you're like, well, like tomorrow you're going to go to your job. And you may be in a work situation where you're treated unfairly, where you're not appreciated. And you're going to be faced with an opportunity to decide how you're going to worship God tomorrow. Well, hey, I'm just showing up, and I'm showing up because God wants me to. Was that your best? Well, they're not worth it. You're not worshiping them. What's your best tomorrow? To go there and respond in such a way like, you're worth my best, Father. What about in our marriages? To be able to give in such a way, to respond in such a way to our spouse, that even on those times when we're frustrated, and even those times we don't feel like doing the right thing, and even on the times where it's like, they want to have a conversation. I'm not having a conversation with them. I'm mad at them right now. Like, you ever do that? Hey, mind your own business. So here's the thing. I'm just like you. So here's the thing, to be able to say that he's worth it. So he's going to get my best. It's very intentional. It's deliberate. And for somebody that doesn't get it, it looks like you're being taken advantage of. It looks reckless. For somebody that doesn't get it, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you do your best right now? I see what you're dealing with. I see what you're going through. And to those on the outside, it's intentionally reckless. To somebody else looking at Abel's flock, they would be like, you're giving your first? Your best first? What are you thinking? Save it. Let it do the others. Let it create other best first. He's like, man, I trust God. This is what I have. I don't know what I have tomorrow, but today, this is my best. And so today, this is what he gets. So number one is acceptable worship is intentionally reckless. Look at number two, if you would. Go with me to Malachi chapter 1. Now, Malachi is in the Old Testament still. It's the last book of the Old Testament. A couple of things is that in the Old Testament, so many times when they talked about worship, that because Jesus had not come yet and been offered up on the cross, that they offered animal sacrifices and different things like that for various reasons, for different things. And so they would bring their own stuff, offer that up. And so in Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, again, one of the simplest differences between the Old Testament and the New Testament, besides it being an Old Covenant and a New Covenant, is that the Old Testament is before the birth of Jesus and the New Testament is from the birth of Jesus on. Malachi is the last book in the Old Testament. And so in that, he's kind of confronting his people. He's saying some things that God is frustrated with them about, that God is challenged with them about, saying like, you guys do this. And they're like, well, how do we do that? And he said, well, this is how you do it. You're doing it this way. When you do that, it's dishonoring to me. And so in Malachi chapter 1, we kind of pick up with it right there. And he starts. So Malachi chapter 1, verse 6 says, the Lord of heaven's army says to the priests, a son honors his father and a servant respects his master. If I am your father and master, where are the honor and respect I deserve? So he said, just in the natural, a good son honors his father. A good worker, a good servant respects his master, respects his boss. He said, well, if I'm your servant, if I'm your master and I'm your father, then where's my respect? And he goes on to say, he tells them what he's talking about. He says, you've shown contempt for my name, but you ask, how have we ever shown contempt for your name? In other words, he said, you're not respecting me, you're not honoring me, you've even shown contempt for me. And they're like, wait a minute, what? How have we shown contempt for you? Well, he's getting ready to explain to them what that looks like. And he says this right here. He said, you've shown contempt for my name. He said, you've shown contempt by offering defiled sacrifices on my altar. Then you ask, how have we defiled the sacrifices? You defile them by saying the altar of the Lord deserves no respect. When you give blind animals as sacrifices, isn't that wrong? And isn't it wrong to offer animals that are crippled and diseased? Try giving gifts like that to your governor and see how pleased he is, says the Lord of heaven's armies. Go ahead, beg God to be merciful to you. But when you bring that kind of offering, why should he show you any favor at all, asks the Lord of heaven's armies? How I wish one of you would just shut the temple door so that these worthless sacrifices could not be offered. I'm not pleased with you, says the Lord of heaven's armies. I will not accept your offerings. So he's confronting them. And he says, you're not being respectful to me. And they said, in what way? And they said, in your offering. He said, when it comes time for you to show me how valuable I am, I get your worst. Now, again, he's saying this in respect to the animals that they offered, the animal sacrifices that they offered back then. But apply this to our everyday life. That in the things that you and I are called to do, that when we go out there, that real worship becomes one of those things when we give God our best, whenever we respond in such a way because he's worth it. And so they were picking their worst, and he said, try that with your governor. In other words, if you had an important person of position come to your house, would you do that to him? Would you give him the worst that you had? Would you find the sickliest thing, the worst thing, and just say, here, this, or the thing that wasn't going to be around that would bring you the least amount of pleasure? Would you give that? Or would you give the thing that's the most valuable to you? Would you offer the thing that's the most valuable to you? Would you respond in a way that you would to someone that's the most valuable? And he said, man, it's a reflection. He said, I'm an afterthought. So I did student ministry for a number of years. I worked with teenagers, not just in church, but like on the athletic field for probably around 28 years, something like that. And one day, one Sunday morning, I was teaching a class. At that time, it was either junior high or junior high in high school. But as I was teaching them, they were just kind of rowdy that day. And I mean, you're like, junior high students rowdy? I know it's a surprise, but here's the thing, is that they were exceptionally rowdy. And so, 2 or 3 times I'm like, hey guys, I really need you to knock it off, and get kind of engaged. And then, I'd kind of put on the, hey, I need you to connect face. And sometimes I'd put on the dad face, like, hey man, you better knock it off back there. I mean, it was like that kind of thing, all right? And so, we had that going on and we're talking and then eventually, man, it was one of those days where they were just, I don't know if we'd spiked the caffeine, if some of their parents would like, hey, take these Twizzlers and go down there and eat 16 of them. We'll show that youth pastor. I mean, I don't know what it was. But so anyway, we're talking and that kind of thing. Finally, I'm so frustrated. I'm like, man, I'm up here trying to share with you guys what I believe God wants you to hear. That's not just me talking. It's not just me saying stuff. But I really believe that the things I'm sharing with you are things that God wants to speak into your world and impact your life. And you guys are just disregarding it. And I said, a number of you guys, man, I know that you like sports. I know you like basketball. And I will guarantee if Michael Jordan was in here today, he'd have every part of your attention. You'd be leaning in. When it was all over, you'd want to get as close to him as possible. You wouldn't want to sit in the back. You'd want to be up front. As soon as it's over, man, you'd maul him like, he is giving away $100 bills or something. I mean, you would just be up here just mugging him. Let me ask you this question. What's Michael Jordan ever done for you? I mean, he's entertained you, right? But you don't know him. If you got in trouble tomorrow, you couldn't call up Michael Jordan and say, hey, Mike, man, it's kind of rugged down here. Can you help a brother out? I mean, you couldn't do that. And yet you would show him great value and great honor And all I'm asking you to do is don't do any less for God than you would do for Michael Jordan if he were here right now. That's true in our lives, right? That we have these opportunities and we have these chances to declare on a regular basis God's worth. And here's the challenge that I face is sometimes in the middle of it, especially when it comes to dealing with human beings, other people, I lose sight of the fact that it's not just a reflection of how you and I are, it's a reflection of how he and I are. That in how I respond to you is connected. Sometimes it's not because you deserve it. It's not because I deserve it. It's because he's worthy. And so that becomes an act of worship because I do it based not upon who I am or who you are, but who he is. And so in our everyday world, we're going to go out here. We're going to leave this place. And again, we're going to encounter the people in our 6-day, 22-hour week that we have to deal with. And we're going to be able to face them and then be confronted with issues. And in that moment, that we're going to make decisions. And sometimes I know in my own life, I make them without any thought about what God would have me do. And then there are even moments sometimes where I have a thought of what he would have me do. And I don't do it. You ever done that? And then afterwards, man, the conviction that like, what are you doing? I think we all face that. But if I can stop myself in this moment, and if I can say, let my response declare his worth in my life, what would I do? How would I respond? That whether they get it or not, would he look at it and go, that sacrifice is acceptable. That sacrifice is a sweet smelling aroma in the courts of heaven. That it fills up heaven because it was selfless. It wasn't done because the other person deserved it. It wasn't done because this situation, these circumstances merited it. It was done for no other reason than you're worthy. And God said to him, he's like, man, if I'm just going to be an afterthought, just shut the doors. If I'm not going to impact or influence the way that you live your life, just shut the doors. When you show up intentionally, purposefully, with the recognition of who he is. Acceptable worship is intentionally reckless. And again, reckless to those on the outside looking in. For those of us on the inside, we understand, I'm just trusting God so I can be what looks like intentionally reckless here. But number 2 is this. Acceptable worship is demonstrated in sacrifice. It's demonstrated in sacrifice and what value is this to me? Sometimes the most important thing to me is to be able to do it my way. And so it's an act of sacrifice to say, I'm going to sacrifice the desire to do it my way. I'm going to sacrifice the right to be offended. I'm going to sacrifice the right to just, to not give my best. I'm going to sacrifice the right to withhold. I'm going to sacrifice the right to do this. I'm going to sacrifice all those things, not because they deserve it, but because you do. And so it becomes acceptable. It's sweet smelling in heaven. Number 2 is this. Acceptable worship is demonstrated in sacrifice. Look at 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel, it's in the Old Testament. It's the 10th book of the Old Testament. So you got like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. If you get to 1 Samuel, hang on, you're almost there. Guess what's after 1 Samuel? 2 Samuel. Thank you so much. Yeah, you guys are right. 2 Samuel chapter 24. Thank you. 2 Samuel 24, verse 18. Now, again, back then, their response to God, because Jesus had not come yet, was these sacrifices. It would be a way they would worship him. And, I love King David. I've shared with you before. I like him because he was a guy that really had a heart for God, but he did a lot of dumb things, and I can really identify with that. Because I love God, but man, sometimes I do really stupid things. Is anybody else like me? Anybody else out there like me? Some of you. The rest of you don't have your hands up. Pray for us, okay? I mean, because we love God, but we do some dumb things sometimes. So he'd done one of those things, and the results of it were starting to cost him. And so he wants to begin to worship God. And so in 2 Samuel 24, verse 18, it says, that day Gad came to David and said to him, go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. So David went up to do what the Lord had commanded him. And when Araunah saw the king and his men coming toward him, he came and bowed before the king with his face to the ground. Why have you come, my lord the king? Araunah asked. David replied, I've come to buy your threshing floor and to build an altar to the Lord there, so that he will stop the plague. Take it, my lord the king, and use it as you wish, Araunah said to David. Here are oxen for the burnt offering, and you can use the threshing boards and ox yokes for wood to build a fire on the altar. I'll give it all to you, your majesty, and may the Lord your God accept your sacrifice. So stop right there. So David's coming there, and he's getting ready to offer the sacrifice. Well, Araunah was like a king of another place, and so he sees David, and maybe on the one hand, it was a little bit unnerving to him, like, what's this other king doing in my territory? And so he comes up and he says, hey, what are you doing here? And he said, I'm here to offer up a sacrifice. He said, I'm gonna buy all this stuff. And Aaron's like, oh, well, hey, man, just take my stuff. Here's the threshing floor. There's an ox. Use that one over there. You just do that and let God accept it. Now, to me, on its surface, it doesn't seem like anything's wrong with this, right? I mean, it's just one king being good to another king, right? I mean, Araunah wasn't doing anything wrong. You say, hey, you take it. It's yours. It's a way of just kind of me honoring you. I want to honor you and give that to you. And it seems okay in its nature. But look at David's response. This guy that had just messed up seriously, had just made this huge mistake. Here's his response. And this is what he said. But the king replied to Araunah, no, I insist on buying it. Why? For I will not present burnt offerings to the Lord my God that have cost me nothing. So David paid him 50 pieces of silver for the threshing floor and the oxen. David built an altar there to the Lord and sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings. Then the Lord answered his prayer for the land, and the plague on Israel was stopped. David said, I'm not going to give God anything that hasn't cost me something. And real worship always involves us giving up something. It's always a release. It's always an expression of value. It's always this, sometimes I remember when I first started understanding worship, sometimes it was me being willing to do things, even when we sing or whatever, to like, okay, I'm just going to, I don't care what people think, for me, just like raising my hands was kind of an act of surrender, because I was brought up in a place where you did, and I thought, I'm probably not doing this right, but I'm going to do it anyway, and that kind of thing. But just things like that we give up, that we give up the right to look cool necessarily. We give up the right sometimes to be understood. I don't know about you, but I always want to be understood. And sometimes we have to give up that right if we're going to really worship God. Sometimes we have to trust him with different things in our life. And so what happens is that we bring this thing that cost us something that we had to turn loose of ourselves as an expression of worship. Number 3 is that acceptable worship requires sacrifice. Acceptable worship requires sacrifice. In other words, it requires our sacrifice. Something that we could hang on to. It could be ours, but it's an expression of value here. I'll show you a picture. So a few years ago, I'm at the age now, and some of you probably get this, like we're for vacation and Christmas and things like that. I just like being around my family. Like they say, hey, Dad, what do you want to do on Father's Day? Just hang out with me and that kind of thing. And so for Christmas, if I don't get, a ton of gifts, I'm okay. Now, I'm not saying don't bring me any gifts. You continue doing that. I'm great with that. But just like being around the family and that kind of stuff. And so a few years ago, at Christmas, we were over at Jake and Ashley's house. Jake is the guy who leads worship. He's our son-in-law. Ashley's our daughter. And so we were over there, and the kids were just running around, and it was noisy, and it was awesome. It was so cool. And the two cool things about it is, one is, man, I love that it's Sound of Life. And the second thing is, I could go home whenever I wanted. And so I just love that. Grandkids are awesome. Let me tell you, parents, don't kill your kids. Better kids are coming. I'm telling you right now, okay? So they're on their way. You hang on. You be patient. God's just. He's just. He'll put your kids through what they put you through. Come on. Come on. Better watch that. You don't want to say that over your kids. Anyway, so, I mean, it's just a good morning. It's just noise, all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to watch everybody enjoy themselves. I'll try to say this without getting emotional. But about that time, my daughter Ashley comes over and she gives me this package wrapped in this green. It was kind of like the florist paper. And I don't know what you call that. And how many of you men are glad that I don't know what you call that stuff, okay? So, yeah, thank you. It's just green paper they put flowers in. So I've seen my wife with it. So anyway, here's the deal. So gave it to me, and I unwrapped it, and there was a rose in there. And I don't want to be the guy that's like, I don't need no stinking roses. I mean, I was like, what do you, so Ashley looks at me and she goes, I said, well, thank you. And she goes, do you like roses? And I'm like, well, yeah, I like, I'm like, what am I supposed to say? Like, thank you. And then she said, well, how about Rose Bowls? You like Rose Bowls? And she pulled out a Rose Bowl ticket for the OU game when Baker Mayfield was her quarterback and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, it's kind of like, I don't know what to do with my hands. I mean, it was one of those things where you're just so excited, and I saw it. And I mean, it just blessed me so much. It was just such a cool thing. And so I got to go to the Rose Bowl game that year. And it was just an incredible game. And I mean, it was one of the best games I saw until the last play of the second overtime. You say, what happened then? The team that shall not be mentioned scored on the final play of the game to beat OU. And so, I was there at the Rose Bowl. We had great seats, man. I'd never been to that event before, and we could just see everything, and I'm watching this game that's kind of a classic in play, something we're going to win, and it's just so exciting, just so many great memories. But then it just ended with that kind of conclusion, and there was a part of me that's like, man, this stinks. And like a minute into that thought, I thought, why are you here? And I began to think about this. But the reason why I was here is because my daughter and my son-in-law had made sacrifices to get me there. This wasn't done out of their excess. Ashley had stepped away from her job at the church because she wanted to take care of the kids at home, and so she was making cookies to help pay their bills. And I knew what Jake made. He wasn't making a lot. And so I knew that for them to send me here, that what this meant was that there were nights that she had to make extra cookies. I knew it probably meant that Jake, some things that he'd bought that he'd probably sold. And there was everything about this gift that just communicated value to me. I mean, it still would have been precious if they were flush with cash. It was like, hey, we had $10,000, we had $2,000 sitting around. Here, you just go. But I knew that wasn't them. I knew there were things they didn't do so that I could do this. And there was not the outcome of any game that could stain this gift in my heart. Even to this day, it's precious. When I think about it, it's hard for me not to get emotional. Because I knew that there were other things they said no to in order to honor me with this. I wonder what it's like to God when our worship's like that. I remember I was doing youth ministry, and I had these students in here, and I love the people, Billy and Andrea are here, man. I love these guys. Andrea worked for us a little bit. She was a great student. Billy helped us. The Chapmans are here, and Andrea, I know this young lady. There was a lady named Jessica Messer, and I knew that at that time she was in a single-parent household, and she was working. Her dad was no longer really a part of her life, and so she was going to school, making good grades. She's coming to youth on Wednesday nights, and she was working at a restaurant tables trying to make a little extra money. And so on my birthday, she came in and gave me this gift, and opened it up, and it was a watch, and it had like an OU thing on it. And I was like, holy cow. And I mean, it was a cool gift, but afterwards I began to think about the things that she did. She waited tables. There were things that she could have done for herself, and she said no to. And let me tell you, since that time, I've been given gifts. When I left Faith Christian, they gave me a watch. If I told you what it was, it'd be a name that you would all recognize. But I've been given watches and that kind of thing. Yet there's not a watch that's more precious to me than that one. Not because it's the most expensive one I've ever gotten, but because I know what it cost to get it for me. When worship is like that, it impacts the heart of the Father. Rick, are you saying he loves us more than we do? No, he loves you as much. There's not anything you can do to make him love you more than what he does right now. But just like it does you and just like it does me, when people give you something and you know that they were purposeful, you know that there were things that they denied themselves because they wanted to express in that moment how much you mean to them. It doesn't matter how much the price was. It doesn't matter that one gift was more expensive than the other, that one watch cost more. This one was more valuable in my heart, not because it was the most expensive watch, but because it was the one that was the greatest sacrifice. I've had trips that I've gotten to go on to, but that was so special to me because I knew some of the costs. I knew some of the sacrifices that were made, and it impacted my heart. And just like we do that in relationships for people that matter to us, worship is real when it becomes an expression to the Father of how much he matters to us. So it means in my life that I say no to certain things. I say no to certain behaviors. I say no to certain things I do because Jesus is Lord and because he's worthy. Listen to this. You don't have to turn there, but Revelation chapter 5, verse 1 says this. The Apostle John was having this vision of heaven. He's in heaven. He says, then I saw a scroll in the right hand of the one who was sitting on the throne. There was writing on the inside and the outside of the scroll, and it was sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a strong angel who shouted with a loud voice, who is worthy to break the seals on this scroll and open it? But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll and read it. Then I began to weep bitterly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll and read it. But one of the 24 elders said to me, stop weeping. Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the heir of David's throne, has won the victory. He is worthy to open the scroll and its 7 seals. I just picture this scene as John's there and he hears this voice, who's worthy? And nobody responds. He starts weeping. Why are you crying? Because nobody's worthy. And all of a sudden this voice says, there is one. And it's Jesus. And so then when I think about doing certain things, I'm like, I wouldn't do that for him. They're not worthy. Who's worthy for me to do this for? There is one. His name is Jesus. So then we begin to surrender and we begin to sacrifice. And it doesn't even feel like that at all because he's worthy. That's when worship is acceptable. When it's been intentional, when there's an element of risk to it, when it's just me, I could do whatever I want, but I'm not going to because I want to express your value. I want you, Lord, to know how much you mean to me. And so I'm going to set all these other things aside and just do this for you because you're worthy.